Hello, this is Ty Newell with COVID status report number 7 with data as of April 5th, and today is April 6th. And a continued message of hope, progress that seems to be taking place both worldwide as well as within the US. The raw data as of April 5th, similar to previous days, shows the US continuing to climb at an undesirable rate. However, as we'll look closer, continued progress towards slowing down the spread. What's hidden within this data is a trend that is very hopeful. And similarly, in many other countries, also a slowing of the spread is indicated. I wanted to just mention a couple of books if you're looking for something to read and something relevant to the study of disease. Daniel Davis's The Beautiful Cure is a wonderful book. He's a professor at the University of Manchester in the UK. And this book, from both a very excellent description of the immune system and all the wonders of the way it operates, but also the personal stories of how researchers in academia and scientific laboratories around the world have collaborated and contributed toward an understanding of something of tremendous complexity and just the stubbornness and the doggedness it takes to continue to make progress while working through these different situations. There's no shortcuts, there's no way to bypass, just incredible efforts made by many people around the world that have given us the tremendous tools that we have today. And then the second book, Smell Detectives by Melanie Kuechel, history professor at Virginia Tech. And she asked the curious question of herself some time ago, what did it smell like in the 1800s? And the Smell Detectives is a journey through the 1800s, but these are people who, at that time, before germ theory was understood and well before anybody knew what a virus was or had seen one, too small for microscopes of that time, that what was called miasma, basically odors in the air from cesspools and slaughterhouses and chemical factories of various sorts, that all of these odors that would build up in an urban environment were considered to be part of what would make us sick. And as germ theory was better developed, it was then discovered that odors and sickness were not necessarily the same thing, but often that odors or poor air quality typically indicated that things were also ripe for germs of various sort to spread and create contagions. So Smell Detectives really is a story of the doggedness of medical professionals, scientists, and engineers at that time trying to improve the environments in cities such as New Orleans, which was just continually hit with plagues of various sorts. New York City, which was just a sewage swamp infested island. And the efforts it took for them to try and improve the living conditions for all people, fighting against politicians, fighting against building developers who could care less about their buildings' inhabitants. And you remember back my mentioning of Florence Nightingale. Florence had the habit of saying that if building owners and building developers had to pay for the health of their building occupants, we would have much different buildings than we do today. And that holds true now just as it did back in that time. The Smell Detectives is a very interesting book and a very interesting take on things. So current trends. everybody, but again, we have to be cautious about the data scatter in some places, except for the United Kingdom, is showing improvement. France, we're still watching this bubble of data move through, but hopefully the trends that we've seen over the last 3 days are real, as opposed to, as we discussed, errors in reporting data from one day to the next. In the UK, where we were hoping for an improvement trend, and perhaps this is just a bit of a hiccup in their data, that they are the only ones among all of these countries to show a decrease in improvement, an increase in the spread rate. But I'm hoping that that, again, is just a matter of some inconsistency in their data reporting. I collect the data at the same time so that it is hopefully at a time when they've all reported in a fairly uniform manner. But still, there's a lot of things a lot of people are doing, and whether or not they're able to get data in a reliable and consistent manner, it's just difficult to do. The US made a tremendous improvement, but again, is this data scatter or not? We'll see in the next few days. But as we talked about yesterday, if every 3 days we can drop from 5 to 4, and then 4 to 3, and then 3 to 2 in the infections parameter, we're going to be able to limit the number of infections in the US by a factor of 10. And of course, that also means fatality should drop by that much. So instead of accepting the nonchalant discussion by the federal government that perhaps 100,000 people will die, I'm hoping that we're knocking that down by a significant amount. So don't sit back, don't take their word for where we're headed, take action. It's up to us to do our part in every community. South Korea, Italy, holding at that level, and I hope that they'll catch their breath and start to get it lower. As we mentioned with South Korea, this is a matter of a couple hundred cases today, a manageable amount, but they have to keep stepping on these embers as they start trying to flare up. Italy, which has much larger numbers, but now is getting in a similar state where their medical system can hopefully keep up with the response, and they can put in place a very strong quarantine and tracking system. In Spain, getting to a similar condition as Italy, and hopefully we'll start seeing them maintain at an infection parameter of 2 or less. France, as we talked about with this bubble in the data, I hope that this will be a consistent trend to be below 2. We'll just have to wait and see. And then Germany showing a similar level, and France and Germany had been quite similar to each other. So I'm hoping that both of them are now going to be able to maintain something less than 2 in the infection parameter. Iran, continued progress, and we wish them well and hope that they're going to sustain vigilance and will keep moving down. And then the United States took a fairly large jump, more than expected, for sure one that would be great if it's true, but we'll just have to see over the next few days of data. So we add another bubble on our progression through the month of April. And as we discussed yesterday, this new path I've carved, if the United States is truly on a path that is going to see a reduction of the infection parameter, so today's data shows us below 5, but this orange path assumes that today, tomorrow, the next day we're at 5, and then the following 3 days we're able to drop consistently toward 4, and then to 3, and then to 2, and possibly below 2. We're seeing that's possible in other countries. that we can, instead of going above 10 million infections, perhaps stay somewhere in the range of 1.2 to 1.5 infections, and hopefully keep fatalities below 20,000 instead of the 100 to 200,000 that that are being discussed. And so a lot of hope. Let's keep our fingers crossed, but we can't just sit back and let things happen. We have to take charge. On the state basis, we see that New York and Washington are continuing to hang in there at an infection parameter of about 4. And as New York is the largest area with infections, what New York does really impacts the overall national level of infection parameter. And so as the infection spread to other regions of the country, those places that have put in place stringent control systems and are urging their citizens to take this seriously, hopefully they'll weigh in with minimal impact, and other places which are discussing opening themselves back up. I hope they don't do it, but don't listen to your state leaders if they are telling you it's okay to go to the beach, it's okay to go golfing, it's okay to go see a group of people. It is not okay, and you're going to be impacting your friends, family, and neighbors by that irresponsible activity. Let me end on this. You may have been hearing about the push to try some new drugs. They're being touted as miracle drugs. They're being pushed in an irresponsible manner. And so I thought it was be useful to state why it's so important that medical professionals, people who have spent their life testing drugs, looking at epidemics, and who have a deep knowledge and understanding, such as Dr. Fauci, in making decisions as to when a drug has potential and is safe for use. So let's go back to the 1950s. Frances Kelsey, seen in this picture from the Smithsonian magazine, and I recommend you look it up. It's a wonderful story. But she's receiving an award from President Kennedy. And the reason for the award was that in the 1950s, a drug named thalidomide was developed in Europe. It was touted as a sleep aid, and for pregnant women, it was touted as something that would settle their stomachs to relieve the nausea. And so thousands of women in Europe and then in Canada, as the drug was approved, started taking this. And it was considered to be a drug that you couldn't take it in a lethal dose. It was just so safe. Frances Kelsey, who was in charge of new drugs for the FDA, stood by herself against the pharmaceutical political establishment trying to shove this thing into the general populace. And when she reviewed the data and she reviewed the tests that had been run, she said these are not acceptable. They're not up to the standard that we require. And with all the pressure put on her by an industry that's given us the opioid crisis, as well as charging us $100 for a Tylenol when we're in the hospital, she stood against them, and we're so thankful that she did, because the United States was able to avoid the thousands of birth deformities that afflicted so many people in the other countries that had approved it. And And so I say Fooliani just in reference to a group of folks who have absolutely no business, no background, no professional degrees, but yet they're haranguing and name calling academics and scientists who have spent careers in public service when they could have instead made a lot of money in the pharmaceutical industry. And so I think we need to reject these folks, these Foolianis, these people who may have been an ex-mayor, but whose brain seems to have turned into jello, and to not be listening to them and to tell our politicians that they shouldn't be listening to them. We need to listen to the folks who have spent their career in service to protect us, and they're the ones who will understand when this will be safe, any drug or any compound, to release into the general populace. So I'll end there. Good night.